Nowadays, when it comes to leasing out your rental property, you really need to think about and you need to be aware of what you should, and more importantly, what you should not include in your lease agreement. Now, number one, I would say, do not rely on a handshake when it comes to lease agreements, because you know what? It is all about the documentation. Now, if you've had a certain situation with a lease agreement of maybe something that you should have put in and maybe something that you found out after should have gone into the lease, leave it in the comments, let me know. And also make sure you subscribe to this channel and make sure you like this video if you like what I have to say. Now, in previous videos, I've talked about why being nice on your lease could actually be bad. I spoke about the importance of having a residential lease agreement in place specifically, and how vitally important it is to strictly adhere to the terms and the conditions as it's set out in that actual agreement. Now, full disclosure, I am not an attorney, nor am I giving any legal advice on any matters. I always suggest that you make sure your agreements comply with local, state, and federal laws by having your agreements reviewed by your own legal counsel or attorney or state regulators, just to make sure that any new and updated compliances are being aligned with. Now, just to recap, the basic premise of a residential lease or a rental agreement is that of a binding legal agreement between you and your resident. This is the blueprint of a tenancy. It lays out the rights and responsibilities of both the landlord and the residents. It's not only a binding contract that the parties can enforce in court, it's also a highly practical document full of crucial business details, such as how long can the resident actually occupy the property for, and the amount of rent they're going to pay each month, along with when it's due and repercussions of them not adhering to the agreement. A lease agreement is a bilateral contract between two parties. In this case, it's between the landlord and the resident. So what does this mean? Well, it means that if the landlord and resident have an agreement and they agree to certain terms such as agreed rental amount, the day rent is due, the frequency of rent, ingoing condition of the property, and ongoing maintenance and how the property is expected to be kept during tenancy, outgoing inspection, and the resident is expected to leave the property. Regardless of whether you decide to use a property management company or you self-manage, I cannot recommend how vital it is to draw up some sort of formal lease agreement or rental contract. And in this, you're gonna want to address the following topics, which are very, very important. First, you want to have the names of all the residents and occupants. I suggest every adult, meaning anyone over 18 years old, who lives in the rental, including members of a married or unmarried couple, they should be named as residents and sign the lease and rental agreement. Each resident is legally responsible for paying the full amount of the rent and following all terms of the lease or rental agreement. Now, this means that if one resident skips out and fails to pay rent, you can legally seek the entire rent from any of the residents. Then, if a resident moves in and their unapproved roommate or sublets the unit without your permission, you have the right to terminate the tenancy and evict all residents if you need to. Number two is contact information. Consider requiring residents to contact you in writing about certain matters. Although text and instant messages might work for some discussions, you want to be able to keep a reliable, printable documentation in the event that you ever need to show a judge a record of all the communications with your residents. For example, you might state that the resident needs to request any repair in writing, or maybe to give notice to terminate the tenancy by sending a letter to a designated address. If you agree to accept email, make sure that you regularly check that email and have methods for saving and backing up everything that you send and receive. Number three, description of the rental. Include the complete address of the property, including building and unit number if applicable. You also want to note any specific storage areas or parking spots that are included. For example, if the rental includes assigned parking, be sure to write that in and put the stall or the spot number. As well, specify the areas that the residents are not allowed to access, such as maybe a locked shed in the backyard. Number four, term of tenancy. Rental agreements create short-term, usually month-to-month tenancies that renew automatically until the landlord or resident terminates. Leases, on the other hand, create tenancies that terminate after a specific term. Usually it's 1 year. Now, whichever you use, make sure that you're very specific and note the start date, the tenancy length, and if creating a lease, the expiration date. Number 5, rent. Don't just write in the amount of rent. Spell out when, typically the first of the month, it's due and how it's to be paid, such as by mail, maybe sending it to your office, online, auto draft, ACH, etc. Make sure you comply with your state laws on paying rent, and to avoid confusion, spell out all the details, such as acceptable payment methods. For example, it could be only a personal check, only cash, only cashier's check. Whether you charge a late fee, the amount of the fee, and the grace period, if any. Also, any charges if the rent check bounces. Number 6, repairs and maintenance. Your best defense against rent withholding hassles and battles over security deposits is to clearly explain your repair and maintenance policies, including the following: the resident's responsibility to maintain clean and sanitary premises and to pay for any damage that they cause, excluding normal wear and tear. A requirement that the residents alert you to any defective or dangerous conditions with specific details on your procedures on how you're going to handle the complaint and repair the request. Next, restrictions on resident repairs and alterations. For example, I suggest prohibiting any painting of the unit by the tenant unless you approve it in writing. Number 7, entry to rental property. To avoid resident claims of maybe illegal entry or violation of privacy rights, your lease or rental agreement should clarify your right to access the rental. Look, it's okay if permitted under states' landlord access laws to have different policies for different situations. For example, you might provide 24-hour notice before you enter to make repairs or maybe to show the unit to future potential renters. But you might not be able to provide advance notice in an emergency. Number 8, deposits and fees. Avoid some of the most common disputes and one of the top reasons landlords are involved in lawsuits, which I talk about in other videos, between the landlord and the resident, by being very clear about security deposit disposition. I suggest having a sample chargeback fee sheet that you want to have with the resident sign and acknowledge what are the fee amounts that can be expected upon move out that they will be charged, the dollar amount of the security deposit, and be sure to comply with any state security deposit limit laws, and how you might use the deposit, for example, to cover unpaid rent or repair damage that the residents caused, and how you won't use it. For example, you won't accept it in lieu of the last month's rent. Whether you expect the resident to replenish the deposit in the event that you have to make a deduction mid-tenancy. For example, if you repair a window because the resident's child throws a ball through it 2 months into the tenancy, that's a perfect example. When and how you will return the deposit and account for deductions after the resident moves out. Now, you want to check your state laws and returning security deposit specifically for this. And any non-refundable fees, such as cleaning or pets, make sure that the state allows for non-refundable fees before you put that in your agreement. Your rules and important policies, if a rule or a regulation is so important to you that you'd want to remove a resident because of it who violated that rule, be sure to include it in your lease. Other not so vital rules can be written in separate rules and regulations document or an addendum to have them sign and acknowledge at lease signing. Landlords commonly include the following policies in their lease and rental agreements. No illegal activity, so that you can limit your potential liability as well as help prevent injury to others and your property should you have to include any explicit clause that prohibits anything illegal, such as maybe disruptive behavior, drug dealing, drug use, excessive noise, or nuisances. Smoking. You have the right to prohibit or restrict smoking of any kind in your rental. If you don't allow smoking, you might want to note the ban includes all forms of smoking, including marijuana or vaping. And if you limit smoking, write out where and what the residents may smoke. Pets. You have the right to restrict or prohibit pets in your rental property, with the exception of service and emotional support animals. And if your rental is pet friendly, include your pet policies. Write out how many pets a resident can have and specify what types, breeds, and sizes of animals you allow. Also note if any pets must be on a leash outside the unit or if residents must clean up pet waste in common areas or in the yard. Number 10, other restrictions. Federal, state, and local laws might require you to disclose certain information in your lease. For example, you may have to inform residents about lead-based paint, or maybe the unit's bed bug history. You also want to make sure that your lease or your rental agreement doesn't violate any rent control laws that could exist, maybe some anti-discrimination laws or health and safety codes. Again, I strongly advise having a local landlord-resident attorney review your lease or rental agreement just to ensure that it does comply with all the applicable laws. So in conclusion, even though this is not the most exciting part of owning a rental property, and while you're not likely gonna get any social media posts or videos of people excited about how they're writing out their lease agreements, I will say that this is the vital backbone of information that is needed to be successful as an investor and to make sure that you are protecting your asset. I would advise that once you have a policy and procedure set and in place, including documentation, it will ultimately mitigate all the variables that can arise as making your investment life a little bit more streamlined and easier. Now, this is Steve Rozenberg. If you like this, please leave me a comment. Let me know if you've had any challenges with your residents or any problems, and make sure you hit the subscribe button and like this channel. I'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching.